with Dr. Lee Hood. And I want to welcome Lee to the University of Montana. I know it's been a long time since he's been here. I don't want to take up a lot of time. I think we'll have a little bit more of a relaxed schedule than we had this afternoon, but I still can't really begin to cover Lee's curriculum vitae and do it justice in a short period of time. But I do have to tell you a couple of things about Lee that I think you'll find interesting. The first is that Lee was born in Missoula, Montana, and he went to grade school here before moving when he was a young boy to Shelby, Montana, where he went to high school. And I think his interactions with his high school teachers there were formative for him. And one of his teachers was a Caltech graduate, and I think possibly influenced Lee's decision to go to Caltech when he left Shelby. And that started him on an incredible journey that I think it's fair to say led to his becoming truly a visionary in the field of biology, biotechnology, and medicine. I think maybe President Obama kind of summarized it best when he gave Lee the National Medal of Science a couple of years ago, and he noted that usually those award winners are recipients because of a particular contribution they made to science. But in Lee's case, it was really a very broad contribution to science that bridged the fields of biology and technology and medicine and computational approaches to understand how the data that was being generated by the technical achievements that were largely driven by his lab would be integrated and then transmitted and brought to bear on problems in medicine. I'm not going to go through all of his awards. He's won hundreds of awards, I think, at least more than 100 anyway. Probably one of the more notable ones was the Lasker Award, which he won for his work in deciphering the mechanisms of adaptive immunity. And I think that is an interesting point to make that I think sometimes gets lost when people talk about Lee's contributions. He's often talked about as someone who founded a lot of biotechnology companies and developed engineering approaches to bring to bear on problems in biology. But it is, I think, in his soul, he's a biologist, and he understands that the problems in biology are really the problems that we have to keep in mind, and that's what we're applying all these technologies to. And his work in adaptive immunity and the complex ways that genes rearrange to give rise to all the responses that the immune system is capable of was recognized with that Lasker Award, which is sometimes called the American Nobel Prize. Yeah, and I think I also would be remiss if I didn't point out his bioengineering achievements that I think he recognized early on with the dawning questions in biology in the 70s and 80s and 90s would require new approaches to technically come to terms with the amount of information that was going to be generated and also the amount of information that we needed to generate and the tools that had to be developed to do that, in particular translating the linear sequences of genes and the linear sequences of proteins, and also being able to write genes and to write proteins or synthesize genes and proteins. And he was integrally involved in those processes too. And he spun off he founded and co-founded a number of very important biotechnology companies, including Applied Biosystems and Amgen, which have been very successful and have brought many millions of dollars to Caltech. So I didn't mention, after leaving Caltech, he went to Johns Hopkins to do his MD, returned to Caltech to get his PhD, and he stayed there for a long time, doing some of this pioneering work in reading and writing genes and proteins. Before he was wooed to Seattle, and Bill Gates was one of the people that supported and saw Lee's visionary status and recognized the importance of it, and really was able to attract Lee to start a new institute there, which he eventually decided to go to separate somewhat from the university. And more recently, I think there's a very exciting new chapter, I think, in his career. That is the Institute for Systems Biology that I think he'll talk about a little bit tonight. Recently is merged with Providence. Now he's the chief science officer for Providence. And I think it's a very exciting time because a lot of the technologies that he developed and that he's still developing, he now has, he and his team have a really effective partner in Providence in being able to now deliver and implement some of the fantastic technologies that he's made. So I'm sorry for the long introduction, but I thought that we should recognize him and thank him for coming, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you, Mike. What I'd like to do tonight is give you my vision for where healthcare is going in the future, and a fundamental part of it will be scientific wellness. We'll talk about what that means. And I'd also like to give you a sense of how we can bring this to the healthcare system. And so we've got a lot to do. We better get started. I wrote a bit of my history just to point out I really was initially engaged here in Montana, as you heard, in elementary school and middle school, high school. And I had some incredible opportunities that most other people don't have. My parents, my grandfather got me into scientific opportunities that were really striking. And as you heard, I had three of the best teachers I've ever had in my career, one of whom persuaded me to go to Caltech, and that was really a seminal branch point in my career. And then more recently, I've been involved since 1988 with the McLaughlin Institute in Great Falls, Montana, that's run by George Carlson, who's here. And I have, together with Irv Weissman, a ranch just south of Hamilton. So I'm a real Montanan, more or less. Yes. When I started at Caltech in 1970, I was really impressed with the complexity of both biology and the study of disease. And I was convinced that the tools we had at the time, cell biology and biochemistry, a little bit of molecular biology, were utterly inadequate to the task. And that got me thinking of what would you need to do to really change this whole problem. And I think a really good analogy is the famous fable of the elephant and the six blind men, each feeling a different part of the elephant and saying it's a spear or a fan or a stump. But in fact, it was all of those things and much, much more. And the question was, if the elephant was a complex system, how could we go about studying it more effectively than with the tools we had at that time? And then in '73, I read a book that really had a striking impact on me, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. And this is a book about paradigm changes in physics. And he made two interesting points. One is paradigm changes are really hard to conceive because they require thinking outside the box, and most scientists aren't very good at doing that. But he argued paradigm changes are even more difficult to achieve because most scientists are relatively conservative and reluctant to give up things that they learned early in their career. And it was this kind of thinking that kind of let me take the first step in a series of what I've called 7 paradigm changes. And they were really focused at dealing with complexity, and they kind of irrevocably took us toward this view I'll talk about later of healthcare and what it's all about. And the first one, you've heard about it, it's bringing engineering to biology. We actually, over the course of years, developed 6 instruments that dealt with analyzing DNA and proteins and synthesizing them. And what this did was open up to biology the idea you could make rapid multiple measurements, high throughput biology, and it created large databases, which were really the beginning of big data and its analytics. And these are central features of modern medicine, as you'll come to understand. One of the instruments, the automated DNA sequencer, was the one that made possible the Human Genome Project and got me invited as one of 12 scientists to the first meeting to discuss the pros and cons. We ended up coming down on an agreement that it was technically possible, though difficult, but we were split 6-6 on whether it was a good idea. And the 6 against it were really against it because of the argument of big science destroying small science. And of course, the Genome Project has created more opportunity for small science than any other thing that's ever happened in the history of biology. But the automated sequencer required bringing together a computer scientist, engineer, chemist, and myself, a molecular biologist. And together we figured out kind of how to do it. And it made me realize that if you were going to practice leading edge biology, you really needed to do it in a cross-disciplinary environment with all the flavors of scientists that you could use, because biology had to drive relevant technologies, and they in turn had to develop the analytic tools. And this holy triangle was a very powerful approach to things. I tried to persuade Caltech in the late 80s to do this, and the biologists opposed it. And as you heard, Bill Gates helped me move to the University of Washington and set up there the first department, cross-disciplinary department. And it was spectacularly successful. It developed key techniques for the genome projects, key techniques for newly emerging field of proteomics. We developed the inkjet DNA synthesizer there that allowed one to synthesize enormous quantities of DNA and on and on. And what I'd really hoped to be able to do was build on top of that cross-disciplinary department at the university, a systems biology institute. And that turned out to be impossible because of the bureaucracy of the University of Washington and the fact that systems biology was really different from other kinds of biology, most specifically because it demanded enormous cross-disciplinarity. So as a consequence, I resigned in 2000 and started the Institute for Systems Biology in Seattle together with 2 other senior scientists. And it focused on taking a systems approach to science in a wide variety of ways, and very quickly came to the view of, after studying a systems approach to disease, the views that systems medicine and a type of healthcare which we call predictive, preventive, personalized, and participatory, or P4 healthcare, were really the way that we had to go in the future. And of course, with all of these tools and the vision of what we wanted to do, a big question was, how could we actually bring this to the healthcare system? And what happened in April of this year was we were asked to merge with the Providence St. Joseph's health system to become its research arm, and I, its senior science officer, to bring these translational visions to the bedside. And at the end of the lecture, we'll talk about just how we're going about doing that. I should have mentioned the seventh paradigm change was, or the sixth paradigm change was really an interesting one, because there we were trying to think about what specific project we'd actually bring to the healthcare system. And the one that we came up with was a picture of scientific wellness. And I'll talk in detail about that, and you'll understand just exactly what I mean about it. But what was critical to scientific wellness was creating a platform that let us, for each person, create more than a billion points of data, different types of data that could be used to integrate both your genetics and your environment. So we got an accurate assessment of you. We'll talk about that in just a few moments. So a word or two very quickly about the Institute for Systems Biology. I think it's really unusual in that it was the first institute that was specifically set up to do systems biology, and its objectives were to point it toward, as I said, biology and medicine, biology and disease. But from the beginning, we were committed to developing new technologies and new computational tools. And from the very beginning, we realized the importance of a cross-disciplinary environment and so forth. We took on many of our problems as big science problems. That means you approach them in an integrated, systems-driven, cross-disciplinary manner, and you sharply defined them and collaborated with groups of people to actually solve these problems. And that led to the idea that we could do that internally, or even better, we could create strategic partners outside the Institute that could help us with these large problems and big challenges and so forth. What the Institute contributed to our understanding of systems medicine were two things. One, I've already described, this idea of dense, dynamic personal data clouds, lots and lots of data surrounding each individual, with the idea that the integration and analysis of that data would lead to actionable possibilities that could either, one, improve your wellness, or two, let you avoid or at least ameliorate disease. We started a program that I'll discuss shortly in 2014, looking at 108 people that went through this project. And that really was the beginning of precision medicine a year before Obama announced it in his 2015 State of the Union. And this is exactly what precision medicine should in fact be. The second contribution of systems biology to systems medicine was the idea that all of us as living organisms are serviced by an integrated hierarchical system of biological networks, networks that generate the information to mediate development, physiologic responses, and aging. And if the networks become disease-perturbed, they cause disease. Understanding how the disease-perturbed and normal relevant networks differ from one another provides insights into mechanisms of disease and biomarkers and potential drug targets, drug candidates as well. So in about 2006 or so, we had really pretty well defined systems medicine and P4 medicine. We had reached a point where we had a whole series of new technologies and strategies we were excited about, but we were unable to persuade NIH to fund virtually any of them because they demanded having them 2/3 of the way done before you could get them funded. So fortunately, in 2007, I met the Minister of Finance at the state of Luxembourg, who was changing the financial structure of Luxembourg, moving them away from a 90% dependence on financial services to bring in biotech and healthcare. And he invited us to write a proposal, which we did. And in that proposal, what we asked for was $100 million over 5 years to build the tools and technologies of systems biology and systems medicine. And these led us to a really revolutionary tipping point. And I'll show you some of these in just a moment, although we won't discuss them in any detail. Once we'd done this, I then made a proposal in 2012 that let's analyze with these dense dynamic personal data clouds 100,000 well individuals and learn what it is to be well. And then in 2014, we initiated this big project with 108 individuals that we'll talk about in just a moment. In 2015, Obama defined precision medicine, and it's a word, I must say, that has swept the world and really caught on. Myself, I think precision medicine is not a very good definition. Precision doesn't say anything about medicine. Precision what? So, but to each their own. And then we had the affiliation I spoke of earlier in this year with Providence that opened the way to actually reach out to the patients' bedsides with some of these ideas. Malcolm Gladwell, of course, I think many of you have probably read this book, talked about tipping points. And the quote here really describes, I think, beautifully a tipping point. It's a point in time where you achieve something that you go over the falls and it starts to spread and trigger all sorts of changes. And we felt in 2013-14, we were at this magic tipping point because of the Luxembourg program, the 100 million that had allowed us to do all of these technologies and strategies. Here are a list of some of the technologies, and I'm not going to go through the details, but let me just say each of these in their own way is enormously transformational of how we can study the complexities of biology. And third generation DNA sequencing, I think, will in the 10 or 15 year period give us a $100 genome. And that'll be an absolutely typical part of your patient's record in the future. And you'll see some of the kind of information that you can get from your genome. But there are many other technologies here, and we've used those in a wide variety of ways. We also developed strategies, that is, putting together one or more technologies with a high throughput platform and computational tools for dealing with all of the data. And these, again, include a whole series of strategies that have really had striking effects. For example, we've made, in a sense, blood a window into health and disease. We can get biomarkers for virtually any disease. And one of the most interesting biomarkers we recently generated is a 2-protein blood panel that has the ability to distinguish benign lung nodules from their neoplastic counterparts. Doing that lets us prevent more than 50% of the surgeries that are typically used to do diagnostics, often on individuals that have benign nodules. And in doing so, we can save the healthcare system close to $4.5 billion a year. So the biomarker can do diagnosis, but it can make medicine incredibly cheaper as well. And we have many other examples of that. There is the dense dynamic data clouds, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And the last thing I'll talk about is really a remarkable new way to generate very large synthetic natural product libraries that can be used to screen for drugs cheaply and very effectively using classic molecular biological kinds of techniques. So whereas it costs a drug company typically $2 per compound to screen for drugs, and their success rate is 0.0001%. I would say here, to screen each thing, will probably cost 0.01 penny, incredibly inexpensive. It can be done incredibly rapidly, and it's the way, for example, to handle things like drug-resistant antibiotic bacteria and so forth. Anyway, in 2014, there was this convergence then of systems medicine and the digital measurements of the self and big analytics and its analysis, and then finally consumer-based networks and so forth that let us define this P4 medicine, again, predictive, preventive, personalized, and participatory, far more effectively. And to show how it differed from contemporary medicine, one, it is proactive. Two, it's focused on individuals and not on populations. Three, it is concerned with wellness, perhaps even more than with disease. You'll understand what I mean by that subsequently. And then number four, it's all about creating for each individual these dense, dynamic personal data clouds so we can assess the impact of genetics and environment on each individual. Number 5, the idea, of course, is that the way drug trials are done now is irrevocably flawed in the sense they'll take 20,000 individuals and give them a cancer drug or a placebo and record the information. And if you just ask yourself the question, how different are these individuals? They're unique genetically, they're unique environmentally. You have no right to average individuals who are so different, and in doing so, you enormously increase the noise over the signal. So what we would do in P4 medicine is have 20,000 individuals, each with their own data cloud, and we'd segregate the individuals based on their own characteristics according to those that responded to drugs or failed to do so, or whatever properties you were interested in. And of course, the social networks are all about education. They're about crowdsourcing, they're about advocacy, and they're about thinking about how to bring to physicians and healthcare professionals this whole new vision of what P4 medicine is all about. And that may in some ways be one of the biggest challenges we have. It is a fascinating one. Once again, if people don't like to change their conceptual ideas because of what they learned in the past, they really don't like to change how they teach because they have all the lectures they've given for 20 years, and gee, do we have to start all over? And do I even understand what I should be lecturing about? It's admittedly terrifying. So this slide is the most interesting one in my lecture. The orange person is the one who responds to the 10 most common drugs given in the US today. So in the best case, 1 in 4 people respond. In the worst case, 1 in 25 respond. Imagine how much money we're wasting with all the non-responders. Imagine how much complexity we have in these complicated drugs and what they do to people that aren't helped at all. And I'll just tell you, if you do population-based drug discovery, you haven't the faintest idea how to distinguish the orange individual from the non-responders. So again, what we need to do is use for these drug studies the personal data clouds and create an appropriate number of individuals that will allow you to create the parameters that will give us who's orange and who's non-responder. And this gives you the chance for really decreasing the cost of drugs. Genentech, with a drug called Herceptin, went into the FDA with 40 patients, and they had a diagnostic that let them make 96% right calls. With 40 patients, they got it approved. With the stratification we can do here, we can do the same every time for every drug. So this is just one of the ways you can really start to save money in the healthcare system. So P4 medicine is about wellness on the one hand, about disease on the other hand. You all know that 98% of society's resources go into disease today, almost nothing to wellness. And what my prediction is we're going to carve out a sector which we call scientific wellness, which will be discrete, separate, and different from the disease industry or the current healthcare industry. And my projection is in a 10-year, 15-year period, the market cap of wellness will far exceed that of disease. And the interesting point that I would make is for the dense dynamic data clouds, there are several things that are really key as to what they can do. And then I'll go and show you how we're going to do each of these, but for one. So one, we can use them to assess your wellness and optimize it. Number two, we can actually take a large number of individuals and follow them longitudinally. When we do so, we'll see transitions from wellness to disease for all the common diseases. And I'm talking about 30 to 50,000 patients we'll be following this way. What we'll be able to do is identify diagnostics and therapeutics that will let us reverse disease at that earliest stage before it's ever become manifest as phenotype. That is, it will be the preventive medicine of the 21st century. You'll be made well before you even know you're sick. And that's certainly what's going to happen. The dense, dynamic, personalized data clouds are going to be transformational in our studies of disease. They will let us learn things about disease. There's no other way we could gain certain kinds of knowledge. And then finally, we're going to be doing a lot of N of 1 experiments in very big populations. And I'll tell you where I think this is really going to be important is in nutrition. I think nutrition today is utterly in the dark ages. I think it really hasn't got an effective clue about how to deal experimentally with the many kinds of challenges that we're faced in nutrition. And I think N of 1 experiments are going to be able to let us deconvolute that complexity. And we can talk about that at any length that one wishes. So why is wellness important? I think it's important for several reasons. Number one, you can do a calculation if you take all of the children born in this calendar year and ask how long are they going to live, 50% will live to be 100. So the question is, what's the quality of their life for the last 35 years? I hope it's not the quality of life for most of the people we know that are living like that today. That's one reason why scientific wellness is key. And the other is there have been some really recent beautiful studies done on what are the real key determinants of health. And one is genetics, and they put that at 30%. The second is lifestyle and environment. That's at 60%. And the third one is your healthcare system, which is 10% or less, okay? So what do we need to do? We need to be able to measure your genetics and your environment, your lifestyle, and we can do that with these dense dynamic data clouds. And this is the reason that we set up in 2014 an experiment where 108 individuals agreed to go through a year-long study with the data clouds and everything. These were friends of mine. I went to NIH and tried to persuade Francis Collins to fund this project initially, and he absolutely refused. I'm not sure he ever really understood what it was, but it was something he wasn't interested in at all. Yet a year later, here came precision medicine, which is really what we're talking about. But what we did, and I think in science you have to have determined optimism. We went out to philanthropy and raised $2.5 million to do the study, and we got it done, and we'll show you the results that came from that. So what are these dense data clouds look like? One, we did the complete genome sequence. Two, every 3 months, we got blood, urine, and saliva to look at clinical chemistries, metabolites, and proteins. Three, every 3 months, we got stool to assess the gut microbiome. And then four, we did quantized self-measurements with Fitbit and other devices that gave personal measurements. And as I said, we did this analysis across a whole year, and we took 3 different data surveys and so forth. And this led to data that, when integrated, gave us these actionable possibilities that, again, could increase wellness and or let you avoid or ameliorate disease. And the critical part of this study was we brought different actionable possibilities to each of the pioneers every month. And the person who brought them was a scientific wellness coach who could, on the one hand, explain what the actionable possibilities were to the individual, and on the other hand, had previously spent a fair amount of time determining what their real health goals were, and she could put the actionable possibilities in the context of their health goal. Because we did this, we had 70% compliance, and it was spectacular. I would have guessed 5 or 10% compliance. But what I will say is apps will never replace coaches. Apps can extend what coaches can do, but they'll never really replace them. The data from the 108 has utterly been transformational in terms of, as you can imagine, developing all sorts of new computational techniques and taking us to interesting places we've never been before. And the analogy I like is the Hubble Space Scope, which looked at the universe with a resolution never before achieved and deciphered all sorts of interesting things. So too, the personal data clouds allow us to view human health and disease in a manner we've never been able to view it before, and it opens up possibility of absolutely incredible understanding. And I'll just show you some of the things that came out of these studies, not discuss them in enormous detail, but one is we could take the data on a wheel of 6 different types of data, and we could ask for each bit of data within that particular subgroup of data type, statistically, how many other bits of data in the other 5 data types was it statistically associated with, either in a positive sense or in a negative sense. And we found that there were more than 4,000 such correlations. They opened up the possibility of seeing systems interact. We had no idea interacted. It opened up possibilities for biomarker identification and drug target identification. We actually identified about 10 drugs that we later found were all under development now, and we hadn't known about them. So this is a really powerful transformational kind of technique. We also, for each of you, because we had your complete genome sequence, could determine your risk for any one of more than 60 diseases by using the data that existed in the literature on genome-wide association analyses. And what these give you are variants that cause very small positive or negative influence on any particular kind of trait. And because they're associated with probabilities, we could add them for each individual. And we could take the 108 individuals and put them in 5 bins from lowest risk to the very, very highest risk. And we could show in 5 different diseases we looked at that the disease phenotype correlated beautifully. The disease genetic risk correlated beautifully with the disease phenotype. So we're utterly confident that we can make these calls. And here's a list of some of the diseases that we will be able to predict for you. And we've had big debates about whether we should do these predictions and how they should be done and what we should reveal? And those are absolutely fascinating questions we can talk about if anyone is interested in. We can look at your genome and we can tell you precisely how you should diet in the most effective way to lose weight. And we had 3 people that were weight loss intractable that we really transformed with this analysis out of 108. Your genetics can also tell you how you can most efficiently exercise. They can identify your predispositions to many different athletic injuries. If you know about them, there are things you can do to circumvent them and so forth. And we found, for example, that there were 3 individuals with very high mercury levels. 2 of them ate excessive amounts of tuna sushi, and when we substituted salmon, their mercury levels went right down. And the third was an individual with a lot of amalgam fillings, and when they were replaced, his mercury level went right down too. So, state transitions between wellness and disease. 1, we looked at people that went from pretty well to even greater wellness. And what's really exciting about studying that group of people is we're now beginning to get metrics that will let us measure quantitatively from the blood the degree of wellness in an individual. And we think we'll be able to do that for mental illness, for mental phenomena as well. And we could talk about that if you're interested. We began to see people that went from wellness to disease transitions. And this was several people, for example, who went from wellness to prediabetes. And in that case, we know what you need to do to bring yourself back and everything. Again, that's the preventive medicine of the future. And we're beginning with Providence to really study individuals with chronic diseases long term to see how they progress, what the effect of treatment is, and their resolution and so forth. And of course, the most interesting transitions in this study were those due to the individuals acting upon actionable possibilities and seeing their chemistries change in accordance with what they expected. And that's enormous positive reinforcement. In the first clinical studies, this gives you an idea of how a typical audience would look. 90% nutritional deficiencies, almost 70% inflammatory complications and cardiovascular prediabetes. Half the individuals were pre-diabetic in this group of 108. We moved 7 completely to normal and most of the rest very close toward normal. So those are the kind of things that it was possible to do. For those of you who like sodas, doesn't matter the calories, this is a horrifying correlation. In the gut microbiome, the only thing that we recommend strongly is you increase the diversity of microbes in your gut. And that does correlate in some ways with wellness. But look what 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 cans of Coke or whatever a day do. They are devastating in cutting down microbial diversity. So think about that when you pick up the next can. One of the individuals that was most interesting was an individual who came in with chronic arthritis in his ankles so severe he could no longer hike with his wife. He'd gone to concierge physicians on either coast, and no one had been able to figure it out. And we were interested because one of the first observations we made is that he had very high levels of a chemical called transferrin, and that correlates with high levels of iron in the blood. And that made us go look at a gene that encodes hemochromatosis when mutated, and he was homozygous for the defective gene. So here was a classic example of hemochromatosis. So there, the actionable possibility is really easy. You withdraw a unit of blood a month until you bring his level down to normal, as is shown in the green, and 9 months later, he was completely normal. The arthritis had totally reversed. Let me say, if you don't stop hemochromatosis, It starts with arthritis, then it goes to destroying beta cells of the pancreas, then it leads to fibrosis of the liver, and finally cardiac decompensation and so forth. These people cost society an enormous amount of money. And we actually have found 2 more since. So we've saved society a lot of money in that regard with this. So the correlations and the genetic risk and the state transitions have allowed us to do spectacular new kinds of things, both for patients and for creating databases which we really believe are going to transform how the healthcare industry practices its art, particularly pharma and particularly nutritional companies. So what were the experiences of the 108? Well, first of all, you might remember that 50% went in skeptical. No one came out skeptical. Most of them said it really was the experience of a lifetime. What they really loved was the possibility to make their own health decisions because they had the data to be able to do so. What they really loved was realizing your genome doesn't determine your destiny, just your probability, and with appropriate adjustments, often it can be dealt with. And of course, one of the most interesting things was they all realized that they were at a lower level in degree of wellness than they ever imagined and conceived. And in fact, the way to think about it is it's a big staircase, and each step is one or more of these actionable kind of possibilities. And most people are pretty low on that staircase. And it is, as I said, the actionable possibilities that can push you up. Now, as we do more data integration, we create new actionable possibilities. And from scanning the literature, we create more actionable possibilities. So we're going to increase the number of actionable possibilities into the indefinite future. There is a group of people studied by Eric Topol at Scripps, 1,000 individuals, 90 years or older, never been sick, never taken a pill, never been in a hospital, completely effective mentally and physically in their 90s. So what we aspire to do then is to take ordinary people through these actionable possibilities up to become a part of the elderly. And I'll say what's really interesting, I learned in studying people that were 115 or older, if you make it to 100, most people die very quickly with a complete systems failure. So what we want to do is get you up and have you be functional through your 90s, and then when you get to 100, you're on your own. So anyway, what this means is I think scientific wellness really is the journey of a lifetime. We started in the middle of 2015 a company called Aerovale that is bringing scientific wellness to consumers. It will have very soon 5,000 individuals that will be following. And again, it's going to create the database that will transform industry. At ISB, what we hope to be able to do is really work on the diagnostics to make these tests much cheaper than they are now. That's the big limitation, no question. We want to work on the analytic tools. We want to develop these 2 metrics for both physiologic and psychological wellness, and then apply the dense data clouds to all sorts of different applications. As I told you earlier, we affiliated in April with St. Joseph's Health group, and what that affiliation did was, one, give us access to Providence with regard to patients and bedsides. 2, I became the chief scientist there, so had a fair amount of influence in what was going to happen. And what we've developed are 5, or probably 7, but I'm only going to talk about 5 translational pillars where we can bring to the patient's bedside these powerful approaches that are systems-driven in nature. So Providence St. Joseph's is a big system, 7 states, 50 hospitals, 7,500 physicians, actually 107,000 employees, and a $20 billion yearly operation. And they're the 3rd largest nonprofit healthcare system in the US, and they have 30 million patient records just waiting to be analyzed and so forth. So we've created a strategic partnership between ISB and Providence and Airvale and a company called Multiscale, which has the ability to extract patient records easily from Epic databases, which are utterly intractable databases to work with, and put them in the cloud and accessible to Jupyter workstations that give us easy means for querying the databases. So this is an integration of 4 different entities that is going to be operating on the 5 translational pillars. And now I'll describe these at a very high level. Providence has agreed to put 2,000 of its employees through the Airvale program for a period of 3 to 4 years, and to follow that with 2,000 employees that get whatever Providence gives them now. And what that will give us is quantitative estimates of the quality of healthcare and how it's improved, and it will give us a good estimate of how much scientific wellness saves the healthcare system. So I'm arguing with Providence that I really think Providence should become a payer and should incur these enormous savings that are going to come. But we'll see where that goes. The second pillar is Alzheimer's disease. And here we're collaborating with a young Caltech colleague of mine. Actually, he's got his education originally at Caltech. He's now at UCLA and the Buck Institute. And what he's done is taken a systems approach to early Alzheimer's and thought about what might possibly reverse it. And he's developed a 36-point regimen that has been incredibly effective with 124 patients in reversing many of those back to normal. So what we're going to do is put it into a classic, well-regulated, well-studied clinical trial that will let us validate the power of this 36-point regimen. And let me just say, the 36-point regimen is non-trivial. We'd love to dissect it down and see which elements are important for which kind of patients. But our hope is that within a 2 to 3 year period, we'll be able 99% of the time to reverse early Alzheimer's disease. The second thing we're going to do is we can now identify the highest risk people for Alzheimer's disease. And we're going to put 200 of those in this dense dynamic data cloud approach. And we're going to follow them over time, looking at the very earliest Alzheimer's transitions and bringing in the Dale-Breseden regimen to hopefully essentially prevent them from ever slipping into Alzheimer's. So we'd like to be able to prevent, for those at highest risk, the disease. The third thing we're going to do is we're going to be taking 100 diabetic individuals, 100 pre-diabetic individuals, and 100 controls, put them on the dense dynamic data cloud, follow them all the way through for 2 or 3 years, and just learn what it takes and what the transition points are and what the most effective regimens for reversing frank diabetes, pre-diabetes, and then maintaining people in a state of wellness. We're going to take 200 women newly diagnosed with breast cancer. We're going to put them on the data clouds and follow them through their treatment, and then we're going to optimize their health immediately post-treatment. And there are about 10 absolutely classic gruesome signs that many women in breast cancer go through, and we're looking at those features especially. And finally, we're going to study a tumor, glioblastoma, because it's very easy to get tumor stem cells from resected tumor to grow out for each patient so we can do the following. I've always thought cancer should be treated exactly as we treat AIDS. That is, from day one, you should have triple drug therapy that ensures you never mutate away and become resistant. And so that's what we're going to do with these patients. We'll take their tumor stem cells, we'll find the most favorably reacting drugs for each individual, and then we'll put them together in combinations of 3 to see which of the 3 are most effective, and test these over a period of time to see if we can really transform things. So, where are we today? Well, I think one, we have brought P4 medicine to the healthcare system, and we've made it predictive, preventive, personalized, and especially participatory with the scientific wellness. Number 2, we are all about using these data clouds to be able to assess genetic and environmental contributions, and I think have had remarkable success with that. And of course, that leads us to the possibility of optimizing wellness, and it leads us to the possibility of following large numbers of patients to get the earliest disease transitions and learn how to reverse them, the preventive medicine of the 21st century. We argue that scientific wellness should be a lifetime journey up that staircase that I showed you, and I'll argue that healthcare is going to dramatically reduce the cost of healthcare and so forth. We're going to create a new scientific wellness industry, and that's one of the exciting things about getting into scientific wellness at the very beginning. I think we'll transform how the life sciences practice their medicine with all the data we've generated. And of course, one of the real hopes is that in a 10-year period, we can bring the cost of assays down to the point where we can take scientific wellness to the developing as well as the developed world and lead to a democratization of healthcare that was inconceivable to think about even just a few years ago. So with that, I'll close. Thank you.
So this has been billed as a conversation, and if you're willing to entertain some
Sure.
questions, that
Sure.
would be great.
Isn't that good? Yeah. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure where you were going. That is absolutely a great question. And the honest answer is we don't know. I mean, in part, we're going to treat them like they're addicts, and we'll take it away slowly so they can get used to the fact that these things are changing. But seriously, we're spending a lot of time thinking about how we can educate physicians. And we have with Providence Science Foundation unit at Cherry Hill in Seattle that has superb educational facilities, both for reaching out to people who attend there, but across the country as well. And we think it is going to be utterly critical to bring in physicians and the other healthcare folks and everything else. The other thing I'm doing is I've been to 2 nursing schools now where I'm trying to persuade the deans to start a whole new thrust on scientific wellness coaching for nurses. I can't imagine a more exciting profession for a man or a woman in this. And, you know, deans take a while for ideas to get through, so we'll see what happens. I've done the same for how to revolutionize medical school, and I'll tell you the conclusion I've come to. I've gone to, you know, all of my favorites, Hopkins and so forth, and I've said, look, if you really want to revolutionize training for physicians, which we need to do, why don't you have your first-year medical students participate in scientific wellness, get their own data, learn how to analyze it, what it's all about, and then we'll design a course that goes right along with it that teaches the basics of systems thinking and all those kind of things. And of course, the fatal flaw in that are teachers pre-exist and they're not going to be adaptable. So I think the only way we can do that is with a new medical school. So I know of 2 new medical schools, and I'm knocking on both of their doors trying to persuade them that this is, if you started out from day one, it really would be the way to go. Then you wouldn't have this resistance you run into. But it's an enormous problem. I agree with you. And all we can do is try, basically. 2 schools. Kaiser is starting a new medical school in Pasadena. And I'm really excited about that. But Kaiser is a competitor of Providence, and I have to make sure I'm not stepping beyond my bounds, okay? And the other one is Washington State is starting a medical school in Spokane. And there I've had great conversations with the dean, and he is incredibly sympathetic. You know, I don't know if he has the resources to do it, but we'll see what he can do. But if you hear of any new medical schools, let me know, and I'll go immediately solicit them. So, yeah. Way back there, you'll have to shout to make sure we hear.
Are you working with any naturopathic schools? I would think they would be very sympathetic and powerful places to work.
Almost all of our coaches have come from naturopathic schools. Pasteur, I'm on their presidential advisory board, and I'm trying to persuade them to do exactly the same thing with their students. And I think he, too, is really interested in thinking about this. So we'll see. But I agree with you completely. I mean, the training they give is so in tune with what scientific wellness is all about. It's really, it's quite beautiful. Back there.
Staying on the sort of topic of education, I could see this afternoon after you met with the students, how enthusiastic they were. So as a university like the University of Montana, without a medical school, but if it would like to start participating in this process, even in the development stages, what sort of new concepts does the university have to embrace as far as undergraduate and graduate education?
You know, I think one of the most powerful things it could do was set up a good, a major in systems biology. Or, I mean, there you get all of the basics and you can start exposing all the rest of the people at the university to teaching. So if I had to do one thing, I'd set up a small unit, and it can be, you know, you don't have to have 20 people in the department. You could have 8 or 10 and have a very broad department that could teach you all the different kinds of skills that you wanted. Now, you want to get someone really good to lead this up. you'd have to figure out where you get the resources to persuade them to come. I mean, I think there are a lot of people that in principle would think about coming, but they're worried about resources and what they can do. But that's what I would do if I were. The other thing you can think about doing is, for example, we're talking with the McLaughlin Institute about the possibility of setting up one or more clinics for Alzheimer's and maybe connecting that with the big program we have in Seattle. You could be a part of this network with faculty communities that were relevant to this kind of thing. Maybe pharmacology, maybe psychology. I don't know who they would be. But explore partnerships within the state and outside the state, I'd say. Yes?
Since we're talking funding, in California, set up the finances for having a state support research into this. What do you think? Do you know about the Montana?
I do. I cut out a bunch of slides at the end of my talk here. So I know about 181. So what I would say is, I think the people who are speaking out against it are speaking for the status quo. They're speaking for the past. They're using the government speak of, oh, it isn't really legal, you can't. That happened in California, and those people got blown out of the water by good, thoughtful, deep people that made the arguments really convincing. And it's all the same ones. It's unions, it's, I don't know all the details about that, but I can, it's education. It's people who see everything as a zero-sum game. If somebody gets 20 million a year, that means I don't get it, or I don't have access to it. And what I would say is, look, this is really a chance for you to build a future for Montana. Using this money correctly, you can bring in superb people. You can set up centers that would be world-class in quality. You can provide an environment where you can take your young people and convince them to be scientists so they could come back. You can create the tools for the means for being able to generate companies and establish another industry here in Montana in a serious kind of way, and on and on. And I would just ask any of those naysayers not to give all the negative stuff and you can't do it because of the rules. What are they going to do? Are they going to do, if you poured 20 million into the teachers union, I don't think you'd even see a splash. It would just be gone.